Oh, welcome, good morning. Thanks for joining me for Lists for Fun and Profit. Mostly profit, but fun, yeah, that's okay too, I guess. So how is SASS Conf? It's awesome, right? I'm so glad I flew like a while to get here. It's amazing. Really short introduction. I'm Roy Tomeji. I'm from Amsterdam, Holland. If you have anything to say about the greatness or crappiness of this workshop, find me on Twitter at Roy. Share your thoughts. I'm a freelance front-end architect, which basically means I'm a front-end developer that hit the glass ceiling of my hourly rate. I started calling myself architect. I could double that. So from now on, you're all SASS architects. I can hardly see you though, because it's dark and I have these lights in my face. So forgive me if I'm not making any eye contact. Shameless product plug. Everyone has talked about their books and whatever. I'm doing a SASS workshop full day, beginner to advanced in a day, near DC. If you want to join me, sassworkshop.com, 20% off with code SASSConf. I'd like you to follow along and work with the code while I'm going through it. If you're comfortable with using Git, you can just clone the repo by going to roy.io/sassconf. It will take you to GitHub. And if you want to download the zip, that's okay too. Go to sassconf DL, and you can download the zip, which you can just run locally. If you're using Bundler, you can do bundle install, and it will use SASS 3.3. If you don't know what it means, don't worry. You can just run it as long as you have SASS 3.3 installed. So that's not that's like the release candidate 1 that was released yesterday. I believe all of my examples, except for one, heavily rely on new SASS 3.3 goodness. So without that, it's not going to run. So, no more slides. This is where I'll be sitting down and typing some code and showing some code. So I like to talk a bit about lists and ways you can use them, and the good stuff you can do with them and the really bad stuff you can do with them. So for the introduction, I'll be going to like how we used to use lists in SASS 3.2 and what we can do with them in newer SASS versions, or the newest SASS version. This is a mix-in that you could use to, if you don't want to hand code your media queries all the time. What a lot of people used to have is a mix-in called respond2, for instance, which had a whole lot of ifs. If device equals tablet portrait, do this. If device equals phone portrait, do that. Well, that's something we could already tackle by using lists. So not keep extending this huge list of if statements, but just loop through it. So here on line 1, there is a list, is a nested list, which consists of 3 lists containing 2 values. So what this mix-in does, it simply iterates over them for each breakpoint in breakpoints. If the first item in the nested list equals device, using nth. So if the first item in breakpoint would be desktop in the first iteration, equals device, then do this. Give back the media query. And you would use it like this at the bottom, include MQ, and then the device name, such as tablet portrait. And then the breakpoint is the second value in the list, for which we're using the nth function again. Is this something that we're all comfortable with? Yeah, cool. So this is how we've been doing it for a while, until SASS 3.3 came along. This already is something that a lot of people may not have used in the past, because I believe each and the other looping control structures are pretty much undervalued. People get sold on SASS because of the variables and the mix-ins extend to some extent. That was weird. People use looping too little. Really cool things you can do with it. So this is one of them. So the old SASS 3.2 way. I need to figure out, I had like a certain, they're not alphabetized, so I need to check which order I'm going in. This is what you can do in SASS 3.3. It's a small difference, but you can have multiple assignments, so you don't need the nth function anymore. So the old one's on the left. So instead of using nth on row 5 directly in your each, you can have multiple assignments, say name, comma, breakpoint, and in each iteration, name gets populated with desktop in the first iteration, and breakpoint gets populated with 1280 pixels. The second iteration is going to be tablet portrait 1024, etc. This cleans up a lot because all the nth stuff is getting pretty messy. It's a lot of brackets, and if you glance over it, it's harder to read the code. So this is what you can do with lists, like ordinary lists, not new data maps, in SASS 3.3. All the rest is basically the same, but it cleans up nicely. Now there's data maps in a new SASS 3.3. You can almost do the same. This map basically is a hash, so it has, instead of going by I want the first item or the second item, this has named keys which have a value. So here desktop has a value of 1280 pixels, etc. And again, you can iterate through these on the exact same way as you can do with lists in SASS 3.3 now. So by using this multiple assignment. And all the rest is pretty much the same. But already it's way more readable because this has a clear relationship. Desktop has a certain value. Instead of going by this convention that your team needs to know about, that you have a list nested in another list, and the first item means this, and the second item means that. That's way more complicated than using the new data maps. But you can still just iterate over. But that's kind of ugly, because we have like new maps functions that are way cleaner. And they look like this. You can actively ask SASS if a certain map key exists. So here, someone called this media query, this MQ mixin with a tablet portrait parameter. And we can ask if this breakpoints list contains a key named device, so in this case tablet portrait. If so, you can do a map get to get a certain value from this map, and you can use else here because you're not using the looping. Otherwise, you would need to loop and then set some variable to true if it actually encounters the tablet portrait value. But by just using if this map has a certain key, you can use else to throw a warning or an error if that's not the case. So less code and proper error handling. So how we're liking maps so far? Better than lists, right? Like Nathan and Chris, and they're all just doing awesome stuff. So this kind of set up for some of the other things we'll be doing. If you have the code, just tweak it and toy around with it and see what works and see what doesn't work. Break stuff, because that's the best way to learn new things. So lists and maps, we kind of establish a difference, and while they're still like somewhat the same, and you can call some of the same control structures on them. For the next example, we're going to look at lists and add some new string functions. Let's say you wanted to have some animation. Let me just get to the browser. Oh, let's say you want to have this. You want to have this rocket animate over the screen. What does rocket do? that follows a certain trajectory, which happens to be what's in here. So what we'll be doing is take this grid and transform that into CSS animation to have that rocket move across the screen. If you're working with the code, just move around those axes and have the thing go all over the place. And boring as it may sound, I'm just going to go over this code basically line by line and see where we end up. It's not even that complicated. So first we need to know like how many columns do we have. So each row, in this case, I believe is 40 characters. Yes, it is. So the grid width is 40. So what we're doing, this is in one of the new string functions. Out of this list, which contains of 10 elements, if I'm counting correctly. Yep. We take the first one using nth and take the length of that string. Yes, that does mean if the first one has 40 characters and all the rest has 80, for the entire duration of the animation, it will be, we'll think it has like 40 columns. Well, if you want to do this in production, be careful, I guess, of the number of columns you use. But maybe you shouldn't use it in production. So a column, the width of a column is 100% divided by the number of columns. So 40, which ends up with columns being 2.5% wide. And the height of a row is going to be 100% divided by the number of rows. So length on a list just gives back the number of items in the list, which is 10 in this case. And after that, it's pretty simple. So we have this rocket, which is just an image with an ID. Give it the negative margin left. I've done that. The image is 100 pixels wide, and I want to have like the tip of the rocket, like this one, to be in the middle. So I just gave it this negative margin. Some animation duration and things like that. Now setting up our keyframes. If you've never worked with, this only works in WebKit, by the way, because I couldn't be bothered using Compass because I wanted to be SASS only, and I couldn't be bothered writing all those vendor prefixes by hand because that's what I would use Compass for. So this is WebKit only. So just be iterating over each row in the grid. So each of those 10 lines, and then get the index of the X character. So in the first line, that's going to be 1. Second line is going to be 2. This line, third line is going to be 5, etc., etc. And it's pretty straightforward. If you have the position, you know what row you're in, so multiply the row you're in. So first row, multiply that with the row height to determine the positioning from the top. And then position from the left, take your column width and multiply that with the index of the X character in the first string in the list. And keep incrementing the counter to make sure we know which row we're at. That's pretty simple, right? I'll just run animation again while I take a sip. Has anyone changed the position of those X's? No one? Audience participation, people. Yay! That's what you get from open bar and drinking too much. I'm just saying. Well, that was fun, right? Let's have a rocket trajectory. But maybe you want to have the rocket rotate as well. So let me just find the next one. Now it's rotating. Now what's the easiest way to tell SASS how to rotate it? Maybe you've seen it in the code already. It's obviously using UTF-8 arrows to determine the angle at which the rocket should rotate. This is basically the same exercise as before. only we need to know, we can't just take the index of the x, because we have, it's like 8 different characters right now. So I created this function called index of character, which takes a string, loops through each character in the string. So it goes from 1 through the grid width. It's important to know the difference between to and through in SASS. Like through is up to and including, while to isn't. So we go over those, like each character in the string, using another new string function called string slice. So from this string, we want the character on position I, which is going to go from 1 to 40 for each column. I want it to end on position I as well, because we only want this one character. So if character does not equal a space, which is all the rest of the characters on a line, then return the position of return a list of the position of the character, so which column it is in. That's over here, and the actual character itself, so the arrow pointing in a certain direction. And otherwise, just return 0, 0, because we have no idea what's going on. So again, we loop through the thing. The only thing we've added compared to the previous example is adding this index of characters, so we know which character it is and its position. Well, do some write those top and left values again, and get a rotation. And for that, we're using a custom rotation of character function, which takes the arrow as parameter. That's this function, and then uses a map to tell us which angle goes with which arrow, and returns a map get from arrows, return the string that we're passing through the function. And then returns an angle of 0, 45, 90, etc. degrees. And this just sets the rotation. And the CSS just get this. And again, just play around with those arrows. I have no idea how to type them, so I just copy-pasted them. But I'm a copy-paste programmer, and that's worked well so far. Any questions about this? Comments? Tomatoes to throw? Nothing. That's good, I guess.
We're just impressed right now.
Our minds are like this.
Already?
Yeah.
Yes.
Could you have used the translate function in CSS3 when you were making this instead of the top and the left?
Probably. I must admit I don't have that much experience with CSS animation, because I just hate CSS. Don't we all? That's why we're here. So you tell me. Probably.
Okay. Yeah, I was curious. Yeah, I looked it up and I was like, well, this could have been just to make sure. And I was like, let me ask. Maybe he tried it. And
I haven't. Let us say just give it a go and let me know, and like when you know.
Okay.
Cool.
All right, I'll do that.
Yeah. Because that's what I like about the workshop format. So this has rotation. Like I was expecting if it's like going to the right to be like more horizontal. Then I have to do like stuff with like degrees and do calculations, and like I have no idea what I'm doing. Like I know there's 320 degrees and it's, oh wait. See? So that's what's going wrong. So this uses axes again, and a like a wider grid and a taller grid, just so the animation will be like more complicated. So let's start at this loop again, because the looping is basically the same. We take the position of the x, cool, and then for the angle, and this is where shit goes wrong, I created this angle function, that stores that takes the angle of the previous one. So that's the pref position. No, it doesn't take the angle. It takes the index of the x character, so the number of columns from the left. After we're done calculating the angle on line 43, then on line 44 we store its current position as previous position, so we can use that in the next iteration. So this way the angle function knows it's the difference of the x character it's working with now compared to the previous one. So this will be 1 because it's 1 to the right, and this will be 5 because it's 5 to the right compared to the previous one. Does this make any sense? Okay. So it tries to calculate the steepness by taking new minus old and dividing that by the grid width times 100. So that means if it would go from left to right entirely, like in once, it should be like totally horizontal, which probably isn't. Yeah, somewhat. It's just going too fast to actually notice. But then it doesn't work for short distances. So I'm calculating the steepness and then for the angle, because 0 would be tip up, and then a rocket will be flying backwards. And I'm not a rocket scientist, but I'm pretty sure that like rockets don't fly backwards. That's why I'm taking the 180 degrees, so pointing downward, minus 0.9 times the steepness. I have no idea where this 0.9 comes from. Well, I put it in, but I have no idea why, and that's probably one of the reasons why it doesn't work properly. So if any of you bright minds has an idea how to make the thing move more smoothly, I'm open to suggestions. So work it out and come show and tell it at the end. Just in your front and tell your peers how you fixed it. This returns the angle, and then the angle goes into the rotate transform. So this is the auto rotation. Still having fun? And constantly seeking validation because you're so damn silent. This is basically I want to leave it at here, like with the grid stuff. Well, I have never felt the need to use this in any project. These are fun projects to, just like John Long showed us yesterday during his opening talk. These are fun projects to learn more about all these string functions and some CSS3, because I hadn't done anything with transforms. It makes you use data maps and looping structures. So while these have no practical use, it's a great way to just toy around with SASS. Just pretend to be working on some client project or whatever you do, and don't tell anyone. So these are all the grids. I'm going like super fast, so I'll be talking slowly. Let me whip up the next one. So this is the new SASS logo with dots, which are SASS pink, which makes total sense. These are multiple box shadows on a single element. So let me show you the HTML. Just some div with ID dots, nothing fancy. And what this uses for CSS, like anticipation, I'm moving backward to SCSS, although you've all seen the code already. This doesn't make any sense. Anyway, this has multiple box shadows, so each dot in there is a box shadow. So that gives us like 95,000 columns, characters of box shadows. Well, how do we get to this? Simple. You take some, you run the image through some online generator and have it create this SE art. Well, it's a grid again, sort of. So what do we do? We loop through each line in that grid of the logo. Then for each character in there, get a character, just like before. See if it is a @ sign, and if so, add the drop shadow to our list of bug shadows by using this custom add.dot function. So here's a function. So what does it? It takes the x position and the y position of the bug shadow as parameters, then constructs this string of those positions plus px, and the color for each dot, and then the sizes are already defined here. And
like global flag here.
yeah, so that's the thing that started throwing deprecation warnings this morning because of new SASS 3.3. This dots variable is like in the root namespace, and then I'm trying to write to it from a different scope, from a mixin. If you don't use global, bang global, that will still work. Or supposedly it does. But yeah, so it's like a huge iteration, so we have a lot of deprecation warnings now. So it's telling us that trying to assigning to a global variable is deprecated, and in future versions of SASS, this will break. So if you see a deprecation warning, this will be a good time to add the bang global. So when SASS 3 something comes along, your stuff doesn't magically break. So that's what the bang global does, but good question. Thanks for noticing. This uses the list append function. So to the dots list, which is right here, which is started out as an empty list by using just two brackets. To the dots list, append this dot, and separate them with a comma. Not a space, because in CSS we want to be using comma-separated multiple bug shadows. So we iterate over all that, and we have this huge list with all these dots and all their positions. And just put it in here. It's a list, comma-separated. If you just put it in SASS like this, it will just be a string with those comma separation.
Could you explain the grid distance 7 line? I didn't get that.
Okay, yeah, so that's the grid distance is how, like the width of a column in CSS. So I want those dots to be 7 pixels apart, and then
They're 6 pixels wide.
And they're 6 pixels wide, and this is the width of a pixel. So if I change this to 10, supposedly, I did put a global back, right? Oh yeah. So this is taking a while because it's like some calculation. That was done. Now we're just spaced further apart. Let me put this back. Wait for it. So it takes some time to compile because we're doing a lot of these appends to a list. What you could try doing, if you're up for it, is see if you can make this faster. I have no idea if it is, by not keeping this huge list and then just using it as a string later on. Or if it would be faster to just make dots a string and append stuff to it all the time. Well, maybe we should just do it. Let's do some live coding. What could possibly go wrong? Oh yeah, we can add strings like to a list. So that should be this. I can't tell if it's faster or not. Plus, it doesn't work. See, live coding, just bad idea. Like, exactly. So, workshop assignment, make this work. So, like more fun stuff you can do with string functions and lists and CSS3 goodness that doesn't work in like crappy browsers, IE, basically. This is fun stuff. So these are box shadows. Then I was thinking, that's cool. Box shadows. Could I create an SVG? Like a scalable vector graphic. You can't do that in CSS. You can style them, but not like on the fly. You can create them on the fly. Like embedded in another document. So how to create SVG? You could do it in HTML, or you could do it in JavaScript. Well, this isn't the JavaScript conference, it's a SASS conference. So what does one do? Writes JavaScript in SASS. Scroll past the same ASCII art. This is going to be just string concatenation. So we're setting up our SVG. Each line in this list represents a line of CSS, of JavaScript, which would later be terminated by a semicolon. So these are separate lines of JavaScript. Again, we can pretty much the same as the last one. Iterate over it, take the position, add a dot, and then the add dot function, if it actually is a add sign, it will add some more JavaScript, join this list to this list, and then I want to show you here. Now we need to take this CSS and get JavaScript to parse that. So list to string just takes each line in the JavaScript list, so all those lines of JavaScript, and then keeps appending them to the return variable. So it appends a line with a semicolon. So this way you get some CSS. This is like over 900,000 characters. Let me show you this file size. So this is what can get wrong. People talk about like inception rule, and you're bloating your CSS file by writing SASS a certain way. This kind of counts, I guess. We're taking this 8 kilobytes SASS file and turning it into nearly 1 megabyte of CSS. There's no reason to do this other than fun and crash browsers. So how to get this CSS into the JavaScript, because I want to write as little JavaScript as possible, because again, SASS conference. There's a fun little trick. It puts it in the content property for a before pseudo element on the body. It just takes this tiny bit of JavaScript to get the computed style of the content property of the before pseudo element. Do some substringing to remove quotes, because this will return a string with double quotes on the beginning and the end. So we want to get rid of those. Hence the substring are going to be eval, and we're going to run it through eval. So we're just taking this string coming from CSS and evaluating it as JavaScript. So this way you can actually make a SVG file or element in SASS. So yeah, start using this. It's awesome. You should do it like all the time. Like no box shadows will make an SVG. So that works. It's going to be huge. And then if you make like a small change here, I'll just sip some water. Like it's talking about use cases for lib SASS, like the C implementation instead of the Ruby implementation. Yeah, this will be a great one. So I'm going to make a GitHub issue for Hampton, telling him that he should just add some SASS 3.3 features to lib SASS, because otherwise I can't make SVGs. Oh, it's done. This takes about like 32 seconds on my MacBook Air, which probably is an indication that you shouldn't be doing this. Now I have this like compulsion to like just go back and change it back to the way it was. So I'll be waiting 30 seconds again. So SVG. Any questions about this? Are we lost or just is it like following along? Who's lost? Who doesn't even know if he or she is lost? Cool. Let's look at some new 3.3 features. This is basically what I wanted to show about lists, because lists are lists, and you can loop through them in certain ways, but that's basically it. So let's look at some new SASS 3.3 stuff, because there's been a lot of talk going on about SASS 3.3, but not an insane amount of like highlights of some new features it brings. Let's look at add roots. Add root allows you to move something, a CSS selector to the root of a document, which is handy, for instance, in this case, when you use SMAX or BAM or similar, when you have a button, and when it's blue, you want to have a class button-blue, like SMAX style, for instance. What we always wanted to do is, let's say we want to do that. We also want to do this, right? And it just doesn't work in SASS. Up till now, it just breaks. So what you can do now is use this one. So you can just use the interpolation to take the ampersand, the parent reference, and then tag stuff onto it. That's a cool new feature. I want to figure out why I was using add root there. Oh yeah. So now we have this nested within block. So you have block and then block element nested within there. You don't want that because that's not how it works. You want to have that on the root level because you're not going to use it in nested context. So by using add root, we'll just do this. It will use the parent reference and move it to the root of your document. Do you get that? You can also use this like taking one. You can also nest things within add root if you have a few you want to do like this. You can also use this, for instance, to break out of media queries. Go read the documentation. There are ways to use add root to break out of a media query. I have no idea how that works. But then again, SASS 3.3 was released yesterday, so forgive me. This also supposedly fixes the issue that John Long was talking about yesterday, where you have like some elements. Was it again, and you want to have this button. I believe this was his example. Plus button in there for those the sibling selector, and then you want it to be nested. Yeah, so you want this to be nested inside foo because it's about buttons inside those we want to have something like this. But that's not what SASS outputs. So you can fix this using add_root. That's what Chris told us yesterday. I have no idea how. I spent like an hour and a half yesterday evening trying to figure it out. I don't know. I tweeted him, and he didn't reply because he was too drunk, I guess. He's not here, right? You're not here, right, Chris? Okay, so we can just badmouth him. He's like drunk all the time. So yeah, supposedly it's possible. I don't know how, and I've tried like a gazillion ways. So if any of you know, enlighten us, because I really want to know. Anyone? So add_root if you have one, if you have multiple. Then there are some new checks to see if stuff exists. So let me just clean this terminal. He's setting a variable named foo on line 5. We're going to check if variable exists on line 3 and do it again on line 7. So let's save this. First it returns false, and next it returns true. Variable exists. I spent, I think, 25 minutes, 30 minutes until I figured out that this does not take the $sign. This just won't work. Just throw an error. Undefined variable foo, and that's really, really confusing if you do it right here. No. It's really confusing because you think like, yeah, I know it's not defined because that's why I'm using the whole variable exists function, right? But apparently I was doing it wrong. You can't use the $sign there. So that's good to know, right? So you can check if a variable exists. You can also use global variable exists. Now we're moving to like scoped variables using the bang global syntax to tell SASS that something within a certain scope should be done in the global scope. That's why you can use global variable exists. You can also check if a mixin exists. Again, false on the first try, true on the second try. You also have function exists, which is real handy if you're like whipping up your own framework using SASS. It's great to know if stuff works. Maybe you want people to be able to extend your framework. If you expect people to extend your framework in a certain way, it's a good thing for you as the framework builder to know if people have actually done what they needed to do. Did they define this variable? Did they define this mix-in, etc.? So this is really handy if you want to build a framework. And with 10 minutes to spare, that's like all the material I've got. So is there anything regarding this or my personal life you'd like to discuss? No kidding. We don't want to talk about this. The personal life. Any code I should put back up on screen? Anything we should discuss?
Is that working?
Yeah.
I've got a question, and I don't know if anybody has the answer. Maybe I've seen that like you made connections with CSS and SASS with JavaScript. Yesterday we saw how some of the connections using Ruby to grab details. It seems like the complicated things that you're doing with data and lists, it seems like there's going to be a natural expansion into being able to bring in data from outside sources. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, working with these more complicated variables and things like that, is there going to be a great need? How do you kind of see this progressing?
Good question. So is this natural way of people? We came from CSS, which sucked, and then we started working with SASS, which is awesome. And then while you're becoming more fluent in SASS, you're constantly like missing features. Because what we actually want is CSS to be dynamic. I'm trying to fix that by using SASS, which creates like new issues, being like there's just certain things we can't do with SASS because we want to do that like on compilation. So it would mean that you often want to do stuff, like randomized things. That's awesome. It will only be randomized once, like when the actual CSS is compiled, because you can randomize something in SASS. It's going to be output once. So yeah, we just keep looking, for, like you say, for more dynamics and moving data from one place to the other. And for a while, I've been wanting to, for instance, using just plain CSS, be able to get content from an HTML node, not having to resort to JavaScript for that. I'm not sure where we're headed. But what we're doing right now, what I'm doing here, like with the SVG example, that's just going to break. That's just hacky and like to the max. So I have no idea how we're going to fix that. It's going to remain like a broken system because it's just CSS. I don't see us reaching a solution somewhere soon because I feel that's like totally dependent on what the CSS working group is doing. And that's just, yeah, whatever they do, they're doing it slow.
Okay, thank you.
Is that like in any way an answer to your question?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, if that's it, I'll say we just wrap it up and go get drunk. Oh wait, more workshops.